Hi everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where you are ever in the world, and welcome to one more episode of Projon. Today we have a interesting guest and very close friend of mine. I have been knowing him since 10 years now, and we have been interacting. Moreover, discussing about few topics on project management. One of the very untouched topic of leadership is going to guide us through. So let's welcome Dave Chauhan, who's the author of Captain Set Sail. Is a former corporate leader turned leadership, a visionary who believes that in a world of constant change, true leadership isn't about control, but about the deeply human art of navigation. He's also the director of Purple Spark Advisory, a consulting practice based in Melbourne, Australia, dedicated to empowering small and medium enterprise to achieve sustainable growth, operational excellence, and market leadership. Dave, welcome to the show and thanks for your time. We are more excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me here, and thank you to your audience to be spending time with me here. And I know you briefly mentioned
Yes.
about my book. We have this romantic and almost powerful image of falling in love with strong captains who are standing at the helm and in complete control. But in my view, leading teams in real world, it's never been the same. I think it's always been where captain and leaders today, they have this walk through uncertainty where they constantly question their decision, constantly check their realities. So great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I would just introduce you a little bit. I think I know that it's a tip of iceberg. You got mammoth experience and you travel across the world. You have been sharing those stories. I never forget that you spend more time in the airport than house. That's how you travel across the globe. And my audience would love to know a little bit about you. If you can just brief about your experience, what you have been done so far, the big achievements you have done. If you can summarize your experience, and we can start with a very interesting topic for you today. And hopefully, everybody will love to hear about your experience. If you can just tell about yourself.
Well, there isn't something I would call as achievement, but it's a messy journey where I started as a fresh graduate in construction industry. From there, I was called to be part of manufacturing, aerospace, strategic defense manufacturing industry. From there, I decided to travel around and move world, and ended up finding myself in Australia. When I came here, the easy choice was for me to go back to construction industry, and I ended up spending time with one of the global, few top universities at Monash University. And at some stage, again, I felt, walking through different industries, there was this constant lack of me missing something. And my initial take was maybe I need to work across different industries. While that did not give me my purpose, what it did give me was opportunity to learn in different kind of scenarios and different kind of environments, which now sort of I can reflect back and see that no matter what industry you are, no matter what role you're playing, the realities of leadership are almost the same. It's never leading in calm, in predictable seas. It's always navigating in a constant change, overwhelming uncertainty where old maps are almost useless. So one take that I've learned through my messy journey is clinging to the idea of that command and control leadership. No matter what industry, what role you are in, that's almost taking your team and your organization to disaster. What works from my own experience is leading where you know that you are about to enter an unpredictable environment, and how you constantly adapt, constantly maintaining your human values, and then being a courageous, decisive leader. So that's the crux of what sort of I've learned in my almost 2 decades worth experience now across different
Sure.
industries. And
That's interesting. I think,
let's
yeah,
talk more.
we are very excited to know about your book as well. Captain Set Sail. I mean, very interesting topic. I have been following you on the LinkedIn, your promotions, and definitely we'll be talking about more about it in some time. But today's podcast, Dave, is all about navigating real leadership and the project challenges through your lived experience. I mean, we wanted to know how you have done it, advice you can give it to our fellow project program managers on the leadership style. So with that intention, my first questions to you: what inspired the nautical leadership framework? Because you have mentioned something about nautical metaphor for leadership, and if you can guide our audience, what is that framework you are talking about?
There are two elements, one personal story and one how my intellectual side of it came to this metaphor. I call myself a metaphor man. Over the years growing up, I determined and I learned that for me to grasp things, it's far more easy to translate things into metaphorical language. And that's how I've learned myself growing up, by having a metaphor for almost everything. My go-to metaphors are usually using an analogy of a car, or using an analogy of travel, transient. Um, and my other side of story is I I there is some level of deep fear for me, um, when I talk about ocean, when I talk about traveling on water. So I think it's, for me, it was trying to comprehend my own fears, to walk about it, and something that I feel is uncertain. Leadership at some stage has been scary, a daunting challenge, and I think they sort of came together. But what I'm trying to say is, from despite my personal reflection upon how I came up with this metaphor, it's mostly that this metaphor wasn't born in a library or in an academic research. It was sort of in my own experience in corporate world, where I feel that modern world is almost as unpredictable as it was navigating and actually captaining a ship back then. So traveling a ship. Back then we had no radars. We had maps which were very sketchy at the best. They were not real maps. They were not true. And we are essentially, as collective humanity, we're entering the similar sort of stage of unpredictable world that we would have seen or witnessed when we were traveling. We were making these voyages back then without having these predictable maps. Like I said, there was no radar. We couldn't predict what was weather going to be like. So essentially, in some ways, every ship was a story between what was happening with the captain and his crew, and the interplay of relationship between all these people, how they were dealing with when things were changing, constantly changing around them. And that, to me, is a beautiful way of predicting what leadership is, because no matter where these captains were coming from, where these ships were starting their journey from, and where they were going, no matter how solid their maps were, there have been, and through my own study and research, there have been so many stories that we can see. Some captains and some crews were phenomenally successful, and they were successful one after another, and then others were not. And it wasn't because they had some special tools, they had some special technology at their disposal. It was mostly the leadership, what was happening on the ship in the very moment when they were conducting these journeys. So for me, that's how this metaphor came into play. And you've heard both my personal and my intellectual side of story now on
Very
this.
well said, Deb. I think I kind of resonate with the philosophy what you have put forward. Now let's begin by unpacking the foundation of your leadership philosophy, because I have gone through a little bit of your pre book reading kind of. So can you explain the meaning of these three significant words you have mentioned over here: beacon, values, wayfinding, mindset, and seafarer courageous? I mean, if you can just throw some light on it.
So the book talks about three topics, or what it basically defines is that leadership, despite complicated, despite having multiple layers like an onion, and once we start peeling these layers, at the core of it, there are three things. That's, as you mentioned, beacon, Wayfinder, and Seafarer. Number one is Beacon. That's solely the values and purpose connected together. So essentially, purpose anchored in values. So it's like a light, it's like a direction that guides you, that in what specific way, in what direction you'll be leading. Second part is the Wayfinder, which basically talks about agility and how adaptable you are. And this is, by extension, leader, his crew, organization, how adaptable everything is in the circumstances when they're thrown at this group or leader. And the third part, seafarer, which is ability as a captain to take the helm. What I talk about in the book is, and through this concept, is that leadership is not about constantly being in the control. But at some stage, as captain, you need to understand that when do you have to act courageously and when do you have to act decisively. And all this being said, in the philosophy of that, yet as a leader, even when you're decisive, you have to remember that you are a human and you're dealing with humans. So you have to remember all the human values that essentially basically make us human. We have to remember vulnerability. We have to remember that there are people, and there is empathetic relationship between captain and our team has and leader and the team as well. So for me, at its crux, these three things, no matter how advanced your team is, how capable your team is, but if these three things are missing, then the likely chance of your team to be successful are pretty low. And these three things create the foundational and fundamental element of what a team and leadership looks like, or successful leadership looks like.
Very well said, Dave, on that. So the next question of mine relates to the same thing. Have you ever faced a leadership storm? I mean, that's very critical. Everybody faces that one. If so, were these three pillars truly tested to resolve your challenge or your, change approach of yours? If you have any case study.
The most recent experience I can think of is during COVID times. Especially in Australia, here in Victoria, we dealt with the harshest sort of environment that government made for organizations to deal with. During almost 18 months window, it was hard to predict what's going to happen because governments didn't know how this COVID pandemic was essentially revealing itself and how circumstances were changing globally. But then based on those external factors, governments were reacting. And like I said, it was the harshest in terms of global response to this pandemic in the world. And being resident of Victoria, here in Melbourne, here in the city where we live in Bendigo, it was pretty harsh. So as a leader, the only thing that kept our lights on um, was how we can make sure that the community we have created, and this was during my time when I was with Zephyr Studios, how we can make sure that the community we have created will look after the community. And that was the prime importance part, or the most important part. And we had to step back and we had to reflect on what were the original values when this organization was established. And community was the biggest element of why this organization was started. And in that way, we were able to keep the proverbial ship going. The organization survived, and we got to the other side through COVID. While a lot of organizations in the similar industry went bankrupt, and while we didn't face that fate in the very moment when we were transit or we were passing through to COVID, I think this metaphor, in some sense, helped us to navigate through that time because
Excellent, Dave.
everything
Yeah,
was the
that's
one
a
step
great
ahead.
example, Dave. Now I'm just changing my segment. I was trying to understand from projects to purpose now. I mean, your evaluation to a global leadership role. You have led major infrastructure projects as well with organizations like Amanas and Melbourne Airport. What are some defining challenges in those early roles you have faced? If you can just guide our audience who's starting their career or maybe is going to start.
Well, if I reflect back on my journey,
Right.
2 decades does feel long and it feels incredibly fast. I started as a junior project engineer right out of university, and I started with Cushman Wakefield, working on big construction projects. And that gave me, to some degree, appreciation for what happens on the ground. How do you deal with real people? And at some stage, that appreciation and that humility that no matter how much education you have, when you walk into industry, you still have got a lot to learn. And I think early on, I accepted that I had to keep my learning mindset on. And while people might think that it always is a game of working with projects and numbers and targets and KPIs, I started looking at a parallel side of things that you have to learn from every experience that you gain. Yes, there are technical skills, but then there are human skills, then there are leadership skills, and how you make sure that that proverbial, that knowledge bank is constantly growing. So that was, through Cushman Wakefield, I ended up joining Woodward, and that was my first introduction to working in really complex and global environments. And to some degree, that gives you an appreciation that suddenly my culture was widening. I started working with global teams, and you start to see that how different thing means different when we look through the lens of different global experiences. And that was the second thing I learned, that, in a global team, in a global world that we live in, it's not about what I'm trying to communicate. It's also about understanding that how this message is going to land, wait for the feedback, and then have a second go at it to make sure that, the message have thoroughly been communicated in both sides. Like I said, there is a first layer of message, which words say as they say, but then there's second depth, that's the cultural depth of what meaning means really. So that was my second experience, and I learned that, one size communication doesn't really fit all, and at some stage, even the understanding of that, hierarchy, collaboration, all that, it's different, and you have to make sure that you bring yourself to the level of your audience to connect with them. This could be in meetings, this could be in teams that you are interacting with, your suppliers, your stakeholders that you are interacting with. You always have to make sure that you need to bring yourself to that level, and that was my third phase of my experience when working with amazing stakeholders at Monash University. And I'm talking about some of these have done PhDs, some of these have done research for decades. And then you go and walk into these meetings and talk with these really amazing people, really intelligent people, and you say a word and you assume that they would know, but then you have to remind yourself that my language of projects every day is different to these
Right.
talented people who speak a different language. And you have to remind yourself that it doesn't matter where you come from. You always have to keep your stakeholders in mind, and you have to connect with them. So that's the third phase of me growing up and learning these nuances, that you have to connect with your stakeholders, and you really have to step in their shoes to understand what really means for your stakeholders when they're doing projects. And I've learned this one thing. This is such an amazing learning that I learned, that when you're looking at a portfolio, you might have 4 projects or 5 projects. From your experience, from your organization's perspective, and from your team's perspective, things might be different on an everyday basis. Priority might change.
True.
Like, sometimes this project becomes more important, and then other days, some other project picks up in that range. But for your stakeholders,
Abs-
their project is
yes.
the most important
True.
project always. And that cannot change. And you have to make sure when you're walking into those meetings that you have to see from their perspective that how vital some of these projects could be for them. um, and I've learned that, again, reflecting back during my experience at Monash University, where you have to remember why somebody would react appreciably different to your own experience and expectations, because one of these projects might be
Mhm.
connected to a research that they might be working on for 1 decade, and your one tiny mistake would essentially impact that 1 decades of work that they have been working on. So you have to connect from that angle, that what it could be for your stakeholders to work from that perspective. And at some stage, through all this learning, through all these experiences, and especially after COVID, which was a life altering moment for me, I realized that, all this experience has been great for me to learn, but where's my purpose? And when that conversation starting happening towards the end of COVID period, my first response was, okay, I think I need to work for purpose organizations, for non-for-profit sector, where I can connect myself with something deeper and something meaningful. And through these interactions, I got called for an interview for the role of CEO for Bendigo Food Share. It's a local food charity in the city I live in. For definition, Bendigo is one of the biggest regional cities in Victoria, in the state of Victoria. We have 7 states in Australia. Victoria is one of the states, nation's leading provincial state. And when I got invited for the role of Bendigo Food Share CEO, and we were going through the interviewing process, at some stage reality hit me, and this wasn't me not looking at numbers, and suddenly I looked at a number and I felt, oh wow, this organization is doing a lot of work. Through this experience, I think I had this first moment where I paused and I looked at it and I felt that real people would impact through this job. And there was an impasse where, board was looking at two candidates, and I was the last candidate, and there was another candidate. And from that experience, I felt like, I need to go back to university. I need to invest more time in studying because I felt deep inside me that I wasn't ready for taking such huge responsibility. And again, that was not the responsibility part of stepping into the role, but that was
Mm-hmm.
me realizing that if something goes wrong, there'll be real people who would miss on their meals. There'll be real people, perhaps an infant who might miss on their meal, or an elderly sick patient who might potentially die because I didn't do my job properly. And until this moment, I always had this attitude towards organized education that, hey, take my degrees away and give me my money back. I'll put money into real world learning, into doing something, and that's how I will learn. But from that moment, I felt like I need to change that attitude. I need to accept and acknowledge that, I need to invest a lot of time and a lot of efforts more into my study. So I'm not essentially a victim of Dunning-Kruger effect. Like, you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So from that experience, I ended up joining University of Illinois MBA program. And towards the end of MBA program last November, I had similar feelings coming back at me again. I felt, okay, why did I start my MBA journey? I wasn't looking for another title. I wasn't looking for a fairer paycheck. For me, it was my own pursuit and journey of finding my own purpose. So when these conversations were happening at the same time, there were chatters of organizational restructure, and I needed a nudge. And who gave me that nudge was my wife. We sat down, we spoke about it, and she was like, Dave, even though you haven't figured out what you're going to do next, you can't figure out if you continue to stay in your fancy role or fancy position. You have to step out, and saying no to a couple $100,000 paycheck, job security, and life that you think is all sorted and settled is hard. And I needed that push, and she gave me that push. She was like, "We'll figure out. Yes, we have got bills to pay. We got milk to feed. We'll figure out." So 3 days later, I am called me redundant, or call me walked away from my job, where I was leading the state of Victorian operations for Amicus, and I love the company. I loved my time there. The work we did was amazing, but I had to be honest with myself that that wasn't my purpose. So, and long story short, that's my journey, and I ended up walking away from my
Oh,
my
that's
my well
that's too
established
deep
career.
and great purpose journey, and the purpose I liked it on non-profit way. You help people. I mean, that's too deep for any program or project manager who is listening right now. The one word you say that if I miss my job to do, someone might be affected, and that's a great statement, Dave. Now, one interesting word with your experience I have captured: managing culturally diverse team is always rewarding and complex. And with your experience, you have managed and you have been a global leader in managing those cross-cultural team. What did you learn about while you're doing this activity as a program project manager, as a leader? And what is a suggestion you can pass on to our generation? How do they do? Because this is complex. You know that, right? All the time. So if you can give some your experience to the audience, how did you learn something and what practice they can adopt?
I think the number one part is communication. And people often feel that there is no such thing as under communication. My response would be there is no such thing as over communication. I think one thing we have to remember is a message said 4 times, and for you to confirm that message has landed well would not be as annoying as when you think message has been passed and the other party did not receive the message with the same intensity. So, and that becomes far more important and becomes far more trivial when you're managing a cross-cultural team, because every message will have a different meaning to different people coming from different cultures. For example, me saying, I will look at it could mean, yes, I will get done. And in different cultures, it could mean, I will actually look at it and then get back to you that what does that mean? So I have to have another layer of getting back to you and respond, what does that mean looking at it? And that's simple one example. From that experience, I think the first thing as a leader that you can do, and that's the bare minimum that a leader should definitely look into it, that when you're dealing with and interacting with people who come from different cultural background, you need to invest some time in trying to learn about their culture. You have to understand that there are different cultural hierarchies. People might assume that, oh, there is Western and Eastern culture. Learning and working with different teams, even within those different cultures, there are some different idiosyncrasies. There are different nuances. And you, as a leader, you have to be willing to learn, step down there at their level, and try to understand what different cultures and different perspectives and different ways of doing things mean. Second part is, as a human, while I'm not saying that, you have to be friends with everyone, you need to also understand, what different lives are and how different lives they look. If I've got a team in Manila or somewhere in Indonesia, I would at least make an effort to understand what does their life mean. Like, what does, a typical healthy work-life balance look like? What do they do out of work? And when you try to set up that genuine human connection, then something phenomenal happens because people start caring about each other. And when you start caring about each other, you genuinely want to learn a little bit more about them. And this is not me saying that you have to be friends with everyone. This is me saying, as a leader, as human, we might as well start enjoying time that we spend most of our lives while we are working with other people. So from that experience, the third part is drawing boundaries. Despite you might be coming from different cultural background, you can always establish boundaries and you can always establish an internal team culture. And that internal team culture, while it's influenced by different cultures, especially for cross-cultural teams that are coming from different backgrounds, you can actually develop something that's your team's unique culture, which means people coming from United States, people coming from Canada, people coming from Australia, people coming from India, they can all collectively create their own internal team dynamics, their own internal team culture. And I think that's where phenomenal, performance, amazing things happen. But you have to make sure there is a lot of effort that you have to put into as a leader to make that happen. And once that happens, I think that people interact with each other, people know each other. Even though we run most of these teams these days through video call and voice conferences and online Zooms, you could see when the very first time people who have never physically been with each other in the same room meet each other, you can still
Friendship,
see
yes.
the real bond, the real connection, the real friendships. And those real friendships, that's when
Very well
magic
said.
happens.
So Dev, that's a very interesting aspect you have shared, intercultural concept for a globally diversified team. Now, this is something what the audience can take it for the young generation of program project manager, how to handle the diversified team. That's a great answer, Dave. Now, changing the gear a little bit about your consulting mindset. Now, the Purple Pack Advisory, you have co-founded it. Now, tell us some story behind what was the spark that lead to its creation, why you have moved into this consulting mindset.
While developing the nautical leadership framework, one thing I realized was what I'm talking about through the book and my ideas about leadership and everything. Those were not just my ideas. And big reason was a big factor behind it was understanding that those were not my experiences, just my individual experiences. Those were shared experiences. The more I spoke with people about their experiences and more I started talking about what I wanna or what I've captured in the book, more I started learning that, there has been this common pattern among everyone's leadership journey that resonates with what I'm talking about. So one thing that quickly became obvious was it's a shared experience. And when you talk about shared experience, then I started realizing that, there is something meaningful for not me just telling the story and what I feel about leadership, but for society as well. And we need to translate this work into some practical and meaningful way that we can reach out to organization. So we started looking around, and by we, this time what happened was one of my university mates, I'm a huge fan of her intellect, she ended up moving to Australia from Canada due to personal circumstances in her life, and she reached out to me, and I think the timing was perfect because she said, I think we should start working on this right away. And I talk about in the book the concept of good enough plans. We never had a solid plan, but we created a good enough plan. We create a business plan that, what we want to do, what's the purpose of the thing that we are talking about. At the time, the Purple Spark Advisory wasn't really, we didn't come up with this name, and we haven't finalized it, so we're still working on it. We said, okay, so the meaningful thing is we want to help organizations be better at doing what they're doing and connect them to purpose. And while doing so, We want to make sure we're helping them with all useful tools that we learned during our MBA journey at Geese School of Business. At Geese School of Business, which is public Ivy League university, they talk about what a top MBA program should always talk about. But one thing that they say before and after everything, it's about business on purpose. And that's their tagline, business on purpose. So we felt, so we're talking about purpose, we're talking about business. We have learned this is part of our DNA, talking about business on purpose. How can we help it? Okay, we got to help organizations. And through that process, we decided that SMEs, small and medium enterprises, that are the backbone of largely every economy, but precisely Australian economy. That's where we wanna help, because that's where the most impact of our work will be. That's where when we can go and help a small private family-run business, they can't afford, or they will never get the kind of expertise that you can get from a really good consulting firm, big fours and enterprise grade consulting. They can never afford, or they can never get either or reason. And that's when we felt, okay, if we are sure and if we believe in what we want to do and what we are talking about, we need to help SME. And through the journey, we ended up, that's how Purple Spark Advisory was born. It came from deep desire to not just writing about something, but to actually do something about what I'm talking about through my book. And the spark idea was, it's innovation. Now I've thoroughly believed in this concept of leaving everything and everyone better than you have found them. And that's where the concept of spark comes, that, as a spark, you are a catalyst. You touch, you are courageous, you're contagious, you're wise, you're purpose driven, and through that leadership, how can you help organizations and make their lives meaningful and better through your work is what is the philosophy of what we do through Purple Spark Advisory. And shout out to my business partner, Ish. She comes from a solid background. She has done works almost as much as experience that I've gathered, probably a bit more and more beautiful and more colorful in terms of, having that versatile experience. And she was smack bang on that, Dave, let's do it. Like, let's not wait. Um, you've got this concept of good enough plans. Let's just make it happen. And that's how Purple Spark Advisory was born.
Excellent. I think I got the glimpse of it. And now, very interesting. In your view, you talked about the Australian SMEs and the small business kind of. So, what do Australian SMEs need the most today? I mean, to thrive in an ever evolving market landscape, as per you. So, if you can guide.
Look, Australian economy is interesting. Most economies are generally on one end or other end of the value chain. And by one and other end of value chain, I mean, you will have economies that are providing a lot of raw materials, or they're doing a lot of initial stuff in a value chain, or there are economies that do a lot of work towards the end or the final product of value chain. Then we talk about economies like India and China that, you add a lot of value chain, but the final product, for example, Apples and iPhones, the final product, the final software gets loaded in the United States, where you add the final high level of value chain in that sense. But in Australian economy, we have this funny sort of intersection where we had automobile manufacturing about 10 years ago, 7 years ago. All of our automobile and manufacturing industry sort of moved away. And then we provide a lot of raw materials. So we provide the initial stuff that the value chain can or start with. And then we are on the other end of service-based value chain. At that interesting intersection, you can see that, it's a unique economy in that sense, especially with COVID and through relationship between United States and China. There is a lot of chaos right now in our economy. That sort of brings back to the concept of VUCA world that I talk about in the book, where we have a lot of resources, but we have a lot of uncertainty. We have a lot of noise, and our economy gets impacted by this noise predominantly. And with a lot of disruption happening, a lot of technological changes, a lot of consumer preferences changing, the bulk of it is being faced by SME. Because while larger organizations always have resources and expertise to tweak and somehow sometimes impact or change the changing circumstances around them, or influence those circumstances to some degree, SMEs don't. They don't have an extensive bank balance where they can continue doing experiments for next 6 months and figure out what sticks and what doesn't. They usually don't have surplus cash. Runway is usually small. So that's where we felt that Australian SME is definitely feeling that crunch now, and there is that huge battle in Australian culture, people and culture, that we love our Australian economy, Australian entrepreneurs, and there is the general appreciation for made in Australia, and supporting local entities and organizations. So I think through that part where we feel, while there is solid affinity and commitment towards SME, there is definitely lack of expertise that SMEs need, and that's what we are trying to do through Purple Park Advisory.
That's a great insight, Dave. I must say that, and obviously your consulting mindset and the vision with your partner you have seen will give, go ahead a long run. And yeah, I wish the best for what you do as part of consulting. Coming to the very interesting segment of this podcast, Dave, your book. Now, I wanted to know a lot of insights from the book. What is behind the scene? Now, your book, Captain Set Sail, has already been receiving praise and for its authenticity and insight. What inspired you to write it? And tell us about your journey like.
Ramesh, if I'm being honest, if I knew writing or I was writing a book, I would have never started. What I was doing was, through my own journey, it was more like a therapy for me to write it down. And at the very best, my idea was I will perhaps create a small blog or some LinkedIn posts, or perhaps a crappy journal that nobody would ever need to read. Like, I will just hide it somewhere. And it was more for me to digest and understand what I'm going through. But at some stage, towards January of this year, it started taking a shape of a book. To me, I had no understanding of what a book looks like. I had no idea about structuring a book. I had no idea about how many words does a book constitute, what do you add at the start of the book, or what should be at the end of the book. I had no idea. My wife goes back to her school, and she's in a leadership role, and she goes back to her school, and fourth or fifth day of her work, she comes back home, and we had this part confrontation, because I think she was concerned about me spending too much time in front of laptop or doing nothing, to her unaware eyes at the time. And I ended up saying that, I think I might have written a book, and she was upset because we never spoke about that I was writing a book. In fact, I didn't know that I was writing a book. I just said I think I might have written a book, and she was really concerned. That she was like, "How could you say that? You have written a book? It's an action tense. It's a verb. Either you have or either you haven't. There is nothing you might have. And you never spoke about it. You're telling me after you've written this book. I said, no, it's not that, I have written a book. It's like, I think I might have written a book. I've been writing this stuff, and it seems like there is a story, there is a common element to talk about. And like I said, leaving Amicus was a huge leap of faith, and she enabled me. And now she's concerned about it. So we said, okay, why don't you take a read? Please, I really want you to read it, what I've written. And through the process, while she was initially upset, she supported me. She was the one who said, while the initial 7 pages are absolute disaster, you shouldn't show these pages
It's
to
honest
anyone.
feedback.
But there is a definite story here. There is something meaningful that you should share with people, and you've got this voice that you want to share with people, and you should work on it. And she gave me a bit of boost, and from there, I often say that, leadership. One thing is also about, we often feel leaders are these heroes, that they have done everything, they've done amazing things, they've conquered the world all by themselves. But in reality, that's never a story. It definitely is not my story. And I know a lot of successful leadership. We talk about, we celebrate Steve Jobs of the world, and phenomenal leaders that get it. But there are always crews and tribes and villages behind them. And that's what has happened in my case. When this first draft was there, Sari, supported me. And then I started reaching out to other people who started having a read of it. And they started giving me advice on it. From through this journey, I met my editor, my designer. Now we have a team, we have a PR team, we have a marketing team. All these amazing people kept on coming and helping me with one other thing, one other thing. And while from face value, it might look like there's just one book which has been done by me. In reality, there are so many amazing people, talented people who were kind enough with their feedback, with their time, and they kept on helping me. So in a way, my bottom line is that when you believe in something, don't wait for a picture perfect plan. There is no such thing, and I talk about in the book. There is the whole illusion of perfect plans is wrong. There is no perfect plan in this world. Start believing in what I call is good enough plans. Good enough plans have a structure.
Right.
I'm not talking about stop planning. Planning is the most important part. But through planning, don't try to get to a perfectly planned, 100% solid, a plan that will never change. And that was my journey through writing this book. In a way, I've experienced what I preach, and that's also through the story of the book.
Interesting. And how do you come up with a name? Because this is personally eating me like Captain said Cell. How do you come up with the name?
I didn't come up with the name,
Okay.
to be honest. I didn't.
The credit goes to.
We It goes to Michael Tizano, who's the editor
Okay.
of the book. We had
Oh
60
my God.
titles. We had 60 titles, and like I said, planning is important. You got to plan. You got to put your full faith in. At some stage, we narrowed it down to 20 titles, and last 20 titles, we had a small analysis done on every title in terms of what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and we had to do a bit of research in terms of what's available and not. And what we decided was this is the hard date by when we have to decide on whatever the title will be. And through that process, narrowed it down to I think five or six. And Michael was sitting, and Michael looked at it, and Michael dropped me an email late night, and his response was, "Guys, of all these titles, Captain Tetkil wasn't even there on that list." And he comes up with title, and we were all like,
That's
"Yep,
it.
this is it, this is it." Because and that's the beauty of planning, right? Like when you have done planning, and when something amazing comes in front of you, and I talk about in the book, that's the wayfinder mindset. That you have to be willing to understand how things are changing, and when new information and new data comes in front of you, how quickly you can pick between what's right and what's wrong. And as a leader, you got to decide that. And at the same time, you have to be decisive. So we knew what that date was, and when this title came from Michael, we were like, "Yep, this is it. We sold. This is the title." So that's how we came up with the
Excellent.
title.
Yeah, yeah. My best wishes, Dave, for that. Now, without disclosing much more about the book, I wanted our audience to go and buy it and read it. Can you share a short, powerful story from that book which still resonate with you today, without disclosing much?
The book has so many stories, and I think let me share a story that I did not talk about in the book. The book has very limited stories from female leadership. And that's not for me to say that I have never been influenced and I have never learned anything from female leaders. It was more from my personal experience that, I felt surrounded by an environment that constantly gave me stories from male leaders. But then when I reflected back, my first leader was my grandmother, who happens to be who raised me, who was my mother in some sense. And I look back, and I had an honest acknowledgement while having this conversation with Michael, my editor, and Sari, my wife, that they both were pointing at me that, Dave, I think there is a that we need to ensure that, we need to add more female leadership stories. And while Jacinta Ardern's story was right there, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, I briefly cover that in the book. I couldn't find enough research from my consumption to talk about in the book. That was number one. Number two, when I started researching on female leaders, what I felt was that if I am talking about female leaders to tell a story, but it is not my story, then I can't do real justice to it. So, what as part of this story we learned was we don't want to do same mistake that I sort of or people around me or leaders around me made mistake by constantly surrounding me with stories from male leaders. Was that we will narrate this story as the audible version in a female voice. So even though it's my view of leadership, what we wanna do by this book is when people listen to this book, there'll be a female. And when we started looking around, somebody just simply reflected back to me that, wait a minute, isn't Sari like a trained theater and acting professional? And I said, yeah, she is. So who can tell the story better than somebody who has been actively part of every phase
Story.
of the story, who has experienced what I've experienced every time when I was updated the chapter or revised the chapter. So yes, so something that's not in the book for your audience, the book will be narrated by my amazing wife, and I think that's going to be a great experience for our audience to listen because She's this amazing actor. She's this talented theater performer who can add more complexity and more layers to the storytelling as the stories of the book come alive through the audible version of the
Perfect,
book.
perfect. Dave, I think that's a great story for the audience. Now, about the book, where the audience can find the book and how to connect with you if they have something kind of, if you can just share or give us some description or where they can buy it or they can find it, the book.
So, well, book will be available through wherever you buy your books from. Amazon and hopefully your local bookshop. And if you can't find stock in your local bookshop, talk to the owner of the bookshop and ask them to get, and they will be able to source the book. But we will be also releasing the Kindle version.
Version,
We'll be
yes.
also releasing, like I said, the
Right.
Audible version. So all the usual formats of the book, hard, soft, Kindle and Audible version of the book will be available through, again, wherever you source your books from. We are about to finalize the launch date. Tentatively, it's going to be late August or early September, and the launch will be in Melbourne. We will most likely do a live launch as well, so audience will know. And your audience can connect with me through LinkedIn, through my LinkedIn handle, which is Dave Chauhan, and they can also search me through my website, which is Dave Chauhan, DIVECHAUHAN.com. And also, I would love to them to drop me a message and tell me that they found me through this project zone with Ramesh. I would love to say them hi, and I would love to listen to their experiences and connect with their
Sure, sure, Dave. I
experiences.
think that's a great offering, and obviously, we'll be putting forward all the notes on the description. Now, the final advice from you to the younger generation, who the professional who wants to share their story or write their own book, kind of, what will be your one piece of advice for them? And then we will go for a rapid fire.
Final piece of advice I would say, in terms of for anything, especially if you're not writing a book, if there is anything that you want to do, don't wait for, like I said earlier, perfect plan. Because by the time you will create a plan, and by the time that plan will hit the proverbial road, things will already would have changed. We live in very uncertain world, which does not mean stop planning. Plan, plan for a day, for a month, for 3 months. That what you can see, and get yourself some milestones. And again, there are real world practical examples of this where we talk about business agility, waterfall methods to, in project management terminology, agile and scrum, and all those are coming. And I think businesses are becoming more and more agile. What I'm trying to say is, as humans, we gotta be agile as those business practices have sort of evolved through time. And secondly, if you are writing a book, don't give yourself challenge to write a book that has to be perfect, that has to have 60,000, 70,000 words. Start somewhere. Start with one sentence, and once you put that sentence down, your own experience will start coming to you. And don't write a book because you want to write a book. Write a book because you have got a story to tell, or you have seen a story that's so common in world that people have observed this story everywhere, and through your means and through your writing they can relate with this story. So I feel for two reasons you write the book. One is if you've got a voice to tell, if you really want to say something, and writing a book is just a means. It's a vehicle. It's a vehicle to share your ideas and get your ideas out to people. And the second reason would be, if you have seen something so common that's happening everywhere, and it's a worldly story, then tell the story because people will relate with that story.
Very well said, Dave. I think that's more insight to our younger audience and the people who's listening to this podcast. Now, I have 5 rapid questions for you. Are you ready, Dave? From our audience, we received it.
It always freaks me out when somebody says
Rapid
it's a
questions.
rapid
Yeah.
question.
So here the first one. One project you will never forget.
My time at ZFit Studios, while it was not a project, I do feel I've learned so much during COVID time, and so many generations feel that, so many people feel that, oh, COVID was the hardest time, and yes, it was made, and it broke so many people. I do think it was such a deep, empathetic learning experience for leaders, and it will essentially changed the way we live and we see leadership as.
Excellent. My second question is your favorite leadership quote.
Viktor Frankl, those who have a why to live, they can bear almost everything. I might have butchered the phrase, but on that sense, yeah.
One mistake leaders make too often.
They think they need to know everything. The most human part of leaders is to say, I don't know. And I think those who can say, I don't know, it's a superpower.
What keeps you up at night?
That we are almost essentially at the doorstep of AI world's transformative impact on humanity. And I'm not against AI. In the book, I extensively cover. In fact, there is one chapter on AI and how we need to be ready for leadership in AI world. What keeps me up is if, as leaders, we are not tapping into our human values and we are letting for-profit, shareholder-driven market decide what will be the future of humanity, that's going to be so bad for humanity. We need to tap into our deep humanness to what we see from leadership in the new AI world, and we need to be prepared for it. And more we talk about it, more it can become a collective voice. And how we see when AI is going to reach this hypothetical point of singularity, when AI will be as intellectually able as humanity is. What will distinguish AI from humanity is a deep a deep humanness, a deep human values. And it's not a question that AI will lead humanity or AI will be slave to humanity. It's about how humanity can integrate with AI in such a way that when AI will essentially become the brains of humanity, and how humanity can hold the heart of humanity in there so that heart and brain can work collectively together and integrate together as one common piece or one collective piece of the puzzle.
Perfect. And the final question there for you is that three keywords the leaders and project managers can take away with them from this podcast.
Lead your team. For project managers, it's never been about leading your projects. It's always been about leading your team and working with your team. It's about leading people. It's never been about leading resources, leading programs, leading schedules, leading contracts. It's always been about, and it will always be about leading people and being their leader.
Thank you so much, Dave. That's it from my end. And it was a great conversation with you by learning about your experience, the story behind how you have done this leadership mastery and handle this project, and more about the book. I couldn't be more excited to get you the first read copy, feedback, and best wishes from our side for your book launch, which is coming, I think, very pretty soon. That's it from our side. Thanks for joining once again, and it was wonderful talking to you, Dave.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure, and I really enjoyed this conversation. Really deep one.
Thank you so much. So, audience, what if your next leadership lessons come from the sea? That was Dave Chauhan, author of Captain Set and Sail, co-founder of Purpose Pack Advisory. So, we have explored the purpose, people, and project mastery with Dave. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned. We'll be having more episodes like this. And once again, Dave, thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Ramesh. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Ciao.
Yeah.